Of all the criminally neglected illustrators who featured in this series, I think Louis Moe has to be one of the most remarkable. There isn't much biographical information available, but fortunately there is quite a lot of visual material. He was born in Norway in 1857, and in his teens he left to study at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen. He was there for a total of 6 years, which he followed up with another 2 in 1882 with the respected Danish painter Laurits Tuxen. And by this point Moe was becoming established as an artist in his own right. He decided to stay in Denmark and he lived and worked there for the rest of his life. In 1890, at the age of 33, he branched out into illustration and created a series of remarkable monochrome drawings for publication in Danish textbooks. With these meticulous dramatic images, he brought to life Scandinavian history and Nordic mythology, and the complex scenes he produced firmly established his reputation for illustrative work. Around the same time, he was also creating other more playful work aimed at younger readers. This was most frequently created in colour and was engagingly frivolous in nature. And in the years that followed, it was this aspect of his output which came to dominate the commissions he undertook. From this point onwards, he divided his creative energies between his art and his children's bookwork, both of which were enduringly successful, at least in Scandinavian countries. In his technical approach to illustration, there was nothing out of the ordinary about his choice of media. He used pen and ink to create finely rendered expressive line work, some of which was reproduced as monochrome. And when it came to colour, he again drew with pen, but kept most of the modelling for his application of tonal watercolour washes. But if the method was commonplace, the results were anything but. The images he created are surely among the finest of their kind, and it's truly baffling that Moe is nothing like as well remembered as he should be. Among many successful picture books, in 1921 he illustrated Peter Croak, and this remarkably engaging and visually pleasing woodland tale sold well enough to justify translation and publication in the coming years in other countries, including the USA. In his ongoing career as an artist, Moe also had a penchant for the more erotic and sinister aspects of fantasy. There were watercolours, etchings and lithographs, which all featured some disturbing surreal elements. But, just like his children's work, they were executed with remarkably high levels of finish and aesthetic sensibility. As he continued to work into later life, his tireless imagination, humour and technical prowess never diminished, and he didn't stop working until his death at the age of 88 in 1945. Charles Donna Gibson was a critically important figure in the evolution of American illustration, and his work and reputation resonated for quite a few years after his death. He was born in 1867 in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and with an obvious youthful talent for drawing, he later studied for 2 years at the Art Students League in New York. Not yet 20, Gibson sold his first work in 1886 to Life magazine, and his illustrations would continue to appear weekly in its pages and on its covers for more than 3 decades. Despite the regular work coming in from Life, he quickly established a wider reputation with other leading publications, including Harper's Weekly, Scribner's and Collier's. Gibson was one of the earliest American illustrators to realize the creative potential of the photolithographic print technology, which had set illustrators free from the constraints of wood engraving. Consequently, his energetic pen strokes were able to build up an image which seemed much more alive and spontaneous than seen previously. In the later years of the 19th century, his images increasingly featured elegantly attired, demurely posed young females. They were quickly christened the Gibson Girls, and over the coming decades the immense popularity of these evocations of beauty made him a very wealthy man. Throughout his career, Gibson remained a dedicated linear illustrator. There were some images created in colour, but they were usually basic colour washes added to already completed monochromes. During the First World War, he used his platform at Life magazine to encourage America to join the Allies, and he also produced patriotic posters. And when Life's original owner died in 1917, Gibson invested $1 million of his accumulated fortune to buy the magazine. But his lack of business sense led to a sharp downturn in the magazine's fortunes, and close to bankruptcy he sold it at a loss only 2 years later. But even with the loss he had made from his investment in Life, Gibson had made so much money from his illustration he bought his own island off the coast of Maine. In the 1920s, the popularity of the Gibson girls declined sharply, and although he was still in demand for his expressive pen illustrations, he rather perversely took to working in oils for his own pleasure and some commissioned portraits. But they were far less appealing than his usual technique, and wisely he stuck with line for his commercial work. He continued to work in books and magazines into the 1930s, and he retired to live out his days on his island with his wife in 1936. And Gibson died 8 years later in 1944, aged 77. The not totally dissimilar British cartoonist and illustrator Frank Reynolds was born in London in 1876, the son of the painter William Reynolds. And so it was almost inevitable that he would go on to study at Heatherley's School of Art in London. He began his career as an artist, and he had some success, but his first illustration work was published in 1901 in the Graphic magazine. Soon after, commissions started to come in from other popular magazines, including the Illustrated London News. In 1906 he began contributing to Punch magazine, and his good-natured, remarkably well-observed drawings soon became a regular feature. Around this time he took a trip to France and subsequently published an album which featured a series of affectionate observational sketches and drawings titled Paris and Some Parisians. In 1910 he began working on illustrated novels, and the first to be published was Charles Dickens' David Copperfield in 1911. The book featured a large number of watercolours by Reynolds, and this was his first opportunity to demonstrate his undoubted skill with the medium in his illustration work. This was followed by an equally lively and plausible edition of the Pickwick Papers, and he brought to life a collection of characters who came to be everyone's vision of the larger-than-life figures who populated the book. In 1913, the third in the series, The Old Curiosity Shop, was published, and this too met with similar success. When war began in 1914, the subject naturally became a dominant feature of his work, but even so he stayed clear of propaganda and stuck with his usual light humorous touch. In 1920 he was appointed art editor at Punch, and he continued in this role for a decade, at which point he gave it up and returned to producing more of his own illustration for Punch and other clients. By the 1930s, Punch had begun to use occasional full-colour printing, and Reynolds happily took advantage of this with a series of cheerful watercolour pages, some of which demonstrated a talent for sequential comedy, and all of which were charming evocations of British life in this period. He also had some success with humorous books, including the golf book in 1932 and another golf-themed collection, Hamish Macduff, in 1937. War erupted again in 1939, but as in the earlier conflict, Reynolds generally left the harsher realities to his colleagues, while he concentrated on lighter everyday humour, which served as morale boosters to the civilian population. Once the war ended in 1945, all evidence of Reynolds' work disappears, but in that year he would have been 69, so it's most likely he just retired. And after a lifetime as one of Britain's greatest humorous illustrators, Frank Reynolds died in 1953 at the age of 77. Although now fairly unknown, Clara Elsene Peck was one of the earliest and most successful female illustrators in America. She was born in Michigan in 1883 and studied at the Minneapolis School of Fine Arts. Her career as an illustrator began in 1904 when she was 23 years old, with the book Phases, Mazes and Crazes of Love, written by Minna Thomas Antrim. The book sold well and Peck soon became a popular choice with other publishers. Shakespeare's Sweetheart by Sarah Sterling was published in 1905, and a couple of years later in 1907, A Lady of King Arthur's Court, also by Sterling, followed. In addition to producing all the illustrations for these tales, she was also responsible for the whole graphic style of the books, creating pages reminiscent of medieval times, with deliberately irregular hand lettering, which she integrated with the woodcut styling of the images. In 1906 she married British artist John Scott Williams, and occasionally they even collaborated on the same project. But a decade later they divorced and went their separate ways. In 1908 she was commissioned by Collier's magazine to illustrate Rudyard Kipling's story, The Adventures of Melissa, and the delightful, delicate pictures she created for this project were a striking example of a perfect match between the text and the illustration. A year later she had another major success with her work for In the Border Country, written by Josephine Bacon. And by this point she had become one of the most successful American illustrators of the time, either male or female. Over the next decade she regularly contributed illustrations to quite a few of the higher profile magazines, and in addition to her ongoing work for Collier's, she also featured regularly in the pages of Cosmopolitan, Good Housekeeping and Ladies' Home Journal. She also created several cover illustrations for Theatre magazine in the early 1920s. This charming series in particular showed her to be an illustrator of both skill and aesthetic judgment, and was another in a long line of creative successes. By this time she had become an attractive proposition for advertising agencies, and she worked as a commercial artist on campaigns for Procter & Gamble, among others. In the years of the Great Depression, Peck fared much better than most, and she continued to create illustration work throughout the 1930s. In the 1940s, she started working as a comic book illustrator for publishers of religious stories taken from the Bible. Whether this was because her usual commissions had dried up, or she simply wanted to spread a religious message, I don't know. But it didn't measure up to her earlier output. And as the 1950s approached, she increasingly focused on painting, and she retired from professional illustration. In 1968, Clara Elsen Peck died at the age of 85. And all being well, I hope we'll meet up again when the next batch is ready, so goodbye for now.